Okay, so it's 4 o'clock. We're going to begin. We've got an ambitious agenda. I'm joined by my colleague, Councilor Orlando Ramos. And it looks like that might be it for now, but as others join, I will announce them. So this is a meeting of the Casino Oversight Committee of the Springfield City Council. And we are joined today by Tim Sheehan and Brian Connors from Office of Planning and Economic Development, City Solicitor Ed Bakula, Phil Dromey, also from EOPD, Tim from the Chicago Design Group, Jose Delgado and Frank Fitzgerald, it looks like he called in from MGM Springfield. And then we also have Lindsay Hackett from Finance. Did I miss anybody? Did I miss anybody that's not a member of the media?
I don't think so.
All right. The media always gets to turn their cameras off. I don't know how fair that is. I want to see, you know, Paul Tuthill in his sweatpants too. That's only fair. So, okay. So the agenda, as I said, is ambitious. Let me pull it up and then we can just go right down the line. Okay, so the first is discussion of surrounding community impact payments. And I put this on the agenda because I was thinking recently about some of the payments that MGM makes to surrounding communities under its HCA and the supplementary agreements. And I just want to highlight a few things about where I understand we are roughly. So the HCA calls for certain surrounding community payments to be separately negotiated with those communities. MGM makes roughly 1.8 million in surrounding community payments. 200,000 each to Agawam and Chicopee, 175 each to East Longmeadow, Ludlow, and Wilbraham, 115 to Holyoke, which was amended, and they're doing a little bit of help with the culinary program at HCC, and then 281 to Longmeadow, and a whopping 475 to West Springfield. Each of those numbers are adjusted according to the CPI, and those are annual figures. So the way that it works under the HCA is that the first 500,000 of surrounding community payment, MGM covers 100%. And then every dollar after that first 100,000, the city has to cover 50% of that excess against its Springfield community percentage payment, which is based on gross gaming revenues. And so if you just run that calculation, they're paying 1.8. It means that under that last year's analysis, the city's share of that would have been about 650,000. But that wasn't actually realized because our total CPP payments, community percentage payments, were capped at about 300. I think it was like 298 or so. So basically what's happened is we've lost the entirety of that community percentage payment, which last year was roughly 300,000. If revenues were higher, we could have lost up to roughly 650. So I know that's a really hard and fast summary of it, but is that right, Lindsay, roughly? You're on mute, Lindsay.
Sorry, yeah, so that's accurate.
Okay. Oh, we're also joined by Council President Justin Hurst and Councilor Tim Allen. Thank you for joining. So, okay, so it's 300 last year, but it could have been up to 650 if we had more GGR, resulting in a higher community percentage payment. And so the reason I put this on the agenda is because I looked at the agreements in these different towns. And some of them are it's hard to describe them as anything other than excessive payments. I don't think that they represent actual impacts to these communities. And based on a quick review of the agreements, each of them have a 1-year look-back study required under the agreement. And so I don't think we're going to get it resolved today, but I just want to know, maybe somebody from MGM, if those studies have taken place, and if so, just send them over to me, and then we'll have a meeting at some point in the future to talk about what the findings of those studies were and whether or not they justified the underlying payments we're making, because it is coming out of Springfield's pocket. So I'll just ask that question. So have the 1-year look back studies been performed?
So I can jump on that. So many of the 1-year look back studies have started, but as a result of the pandemic and COVID, a lot of them were postponed and shut down at the request of many of the towns. So they have not been completed in terms of the traffic studies. In terms of there's other studies that do everything other than traffic. So it talks about, economic impact, public safety. That study has been finished, and I think we're wrapping it up. The consultant is wrapping that up and sending them out to the towns as we speak.
Okay. So in the agreements, it says that they're going to do the study. Well, first of all, the city has the right to assent, which will not unreasonably be withheld. But okay, so it says the study will be 15 months following the opening. So we're definitely outside of that. So I would just ask that as those studies are completed, and hopefully they're completed before the end of this year, we be sent a copy so that we can review.
I'll jump in as well. This is Seth. We're happy to send them to you. I don't know that they'll be done by the end of the year. One of the challenges, Councilor Fenton, and I guess we're empathetic with the community's positions on this, is that in this environment to measure traffic to look back would be artificially low because we're closed or significantly reduced. So they feel like it's not a fair. I think that the pandemic fairly delayed the traffic studies because it's an artificial picture of what was intended under those agreements, which is to show what the normal state is after, a year after opening, and we're not in the normal state. So they're at various levels of completion based on the community, but I think until we're at a more normalized state of operation, I think both parties understand that it could defeat part of the purpose of the study to measure it during this period.
Well, thank you for that. But it says 15 months. And when 15 months came, there was no pandemic.
Right. And that's when they were started. So that was what?
A year ago.
Yeah, it was they kicked off at that 15-month period, but the traffic studies take a couple months, and then we ran into the pandemic.
All right. Well, we can follow up on it, but
yeah, we'll send you what we have so far. I mean, we're also interested in getting these finalized, but the pandemic has thrown a wrench into it.
All right, I understand. But if you just send us what you got, we can review it at the next meeting. And then another thing, just for the next meeting, before I open it up to other counselors and maybe move on to the next agenda item, is I read the First Amendment to the agreement with Holyoke, and I want to know whether or not those added payments to Holyoke under the culinary program are being counted for purposes of the surrounding community calculation. Probably don't know the answer to that right now, but that's something we can follow up on at the next meeting. Because if that's true, then that would increase the number from 650 to another number. All right. So any counselors on the call have any questions about the surrounding community payments?
I think it's a good idea to look at, to get started on looking at that, because it was 15 months. The 15-month mark would have been a year ago next week, August 24th to November 24th, a year later, is 15 months. So there was, another 3 or 4 months before the pandemic hit.
Councilor Ramos, you have your hand raised.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, not a question, just a comment. I share your concern regarding these surrounding community payments. A lot of people fail to remember that this is a partnership between private and public, right? We have a revenue sharing agreement under the ACA. And so, I think it's definitely worth looking into. It's pretty obvious that at this point there hasn't been, the surrounding communities have not been impacted in the way that they thought they would, and particularly around this pandemic. So, definitely agree with your point that we should take a second look at that.
Thanks. Councilor Allen, your hand is raised again, or was that from
No,
before?
that was from before. Thanks.
Okay. All right. So we're also joined by a member of the committee, Councilor Gomez. Thank you for joining. All right. Seeing no other hands raised, let's move on to the next item. So Civic Center Overlay District. Well, you know what? Why don't we do it sort of in inverse order? Why don't we start with the Casino District Plan, and then we'll do the Civic Center Overlay District and the loan program, because it seems like that's the right order to do it. We'll start with the Casino District Plan, because as a result of the Casino District Plan, that's what's giving us the Overlay District and the loan program. So,
Mr.
Tim?
Chairman, we've, first of all, thank you and the counselors for giving us some time to update you with regards to the master planning that's happening in and around the casino. In the interest of time, we've actually integrated everything into one presentation, so that way we can move pretty expeditiously through the 3 items. But in the fall of 2019, we really started undertaking an intensive planning effort for the area around the casino. That was precipitated both by the lack of ancillary development occurring around the casino as was originally anticipated, and an understanding of the market challenges to such development actually occurring. The work was accelerated, obviously, when 3 significant properties directly across the street from the casino went up for auction and subsequently were foreclosed on by the lenders. For the past year, this planning effort has been advancing, and at this time, 2 component pieces of the plan are ready to advance to the council. That would be the overlay zoning for the area and the Section 108 loan guarantee. Both of these elements of the plan are critical to advancing the implementation of the plan and achieving the stated goals and objectives. So Tim Brangle from the Chicago Consulting Studio will be walking you through the presentation, a high-level presentation of the objectives of the plan. Phil Dromey will talk about the goals and objectives associated with the zoning, and Brian will give you a follow-up on the objectives associated with the Section 108 and its purpose and the overall plan. So with that, I'll turn it over quickly to Tim to begin.
Hello, sorry. Are you all there? Can you see the screen?
Yes.
we can see.
Very good. Yeah, as Tim mentioned, we're going to hit a couple key topics. I think Tim summarized that perfectly. I want to give you a little bit of overview on the blueprint, where we've advanced to provide the context for the topics today on the overlay district itself and the zoning, as well as some of the incentives. But to jump right in, the blueprint came about in 2018. It was called out in the HCA. It's kind of stemming from MGM's original proposal for a blue zone, which we thought was fantastic and advanced. And there was a collaborative effort with the city and MGM, working with Seth and Jose and others, to put together a roadmap of strategies and initiatives. And that kind of boiled down in late 2018 and 2019 into the blueprint, which identified really 4 key objectives or key zones for continual evolution over the next 4, 5, 6 years. And really, first and foremost, was the notion of looking at the key strategic collateral economic development sites. And that's what we'll talk a lot about today. It's the impetus for the zoning overlay as well. We also zeroed in on the convention industry and the ability to leverage what MGM had done in creating new markets and new tourism, how MGM and how the Mass Mutual Center could fit into that, because as the second economic engine really of downtown next to MGM, this was important. The third, also picking up a little bit on what MGM had done in terms of promoting and facilitating market rate residential, the need to attract more people to downtown, to build that environment and create a sustainable marketplace for all the activity that could come to downtown. And then fourth, really leveraging all of that into attracting new employers and new businesses. And that's sort of set the general parameters or roadmap, if you will, of the blueprint. Let's see. Just to look quickly, when we started looking at the MGM impact, for all intents and purposes, MGM delivered on what they said they were going to do. And that really was providing that transformative project and an economic engine in the heart of downtown in the South End that, whose impact, the $950 million investment really transformed that area. It did bring new tourism, 10,000 visitors a day. Again, these are pre-pandemic numbers. Significant new gaming tax revenue, on average at the time of 22 million, although some of that's bouncing back as well. And then an overall increase in the rooms and hotel tax in and around the area. So generally increasing tourism, exactly what we had hoped would happen in terms of again, generating a new activity, new appeal for Springfield. However, that engine, if you will, is there. And yet it hasn't really been effectively leveraged by the real estate market for a variety of reasons. And it really has stymied a lot of what we thought was going to happen. Actually, the reverse has happened. In fact, the spin-off activity hasn't occurred. A lot of those key properties that we thought would be ideal, some of the old restaurants and some of the bars and things that were immediately adjacent in that district have sat vacant, and worse now, some are, as Tim mentioned, went to auction and now are in foreclosure. And a lot of that, I think, stemmed from a couple things that we assessed early on. One being that MGM's purchase price drove sort of an artificial inflation of the property values, which ultimately reflected in some of the rents also going up that were unsustainable for certainly for potential tenants and those that would look to come into a market and be a part of around the MGM anchor and convention anchor. It also led to a lot of speculation in and around the casino, that sort of this expectation that MGM might expand at some point. I think they've made it clear, and that is not part of the plan. They've delivered what they said they were going to do, and sort of, so now we had a variety of parcels and tenants and landlords sitting with a wait and see attitude. That's fostered more disinvestment, violations, and growing blight. And so, in fact, what we thought was happening, actually the reverse has happened. We've got growing blight in the area, and it's at such a scale today that, quite honestly, the private market hasn't responded and probably won't. They can't resolve it without some input of the city and their approach. And so we've taken a very proactive approach, first and foremost, zeroing in the blueprint a little bit on those key sites and the collateral or those catalytic sites and potentials in and around the casino, and started to frame what we're calling a master development strategy package. And I think it's important, the 3 components of it, of which, I'll talk briefly about the framework, and we'll talk about the zoning and the incentives, but those 3 pieces together really helps articulate a city vision, which, MGM had done it, but the city really needs now to put forth what their expectations would be in this area and what they would see as the opportunities, somewhat of a pitch as well. And then bolstering that with the zoning and controls, making sure that we ensure that compatible complementary development is what we drive in this area through zoning, and make it a priority such that the zoning overlay can help establish almost, I won't say expedited, but certainly encourage a lot of uses that would be complementary. And then finally close the gap. There was a gap prior to COVID. There's likely to be a bigger gap after, but development hasn't happened. And so we have to look at a range of incentives from federal to state to local, both in terms of where we are today, pre-development through infrastructure, through vertical development, and even down to tenanting. So there's a range that we're looking at. As Tim alluded, the Section 108 is part of that, how we can utilize some of the city's tools to help gain control and help push some of the planning. As part of that early January or early effort on the blueprint, we zeroed in again on this zone and identified a number of areas for development, areas of initiatives that came out of of those critical sites. They started to coalesce around really the Main Street corridor and a focus on those properties that aren't contributing. And if you kind of look at the white here, they're not the white areas. Those are really a lot of the parcels that we think are key to helping revitalize Main Street, and right now aren't contributing. They're in study. Some of them are starting to pop, but really focus on Main Street. Don't want to forget about Court Square as the sort of central arrival space to downtown, and also the place where 31 Elm is going to reside, and some activity front door to the convention center. So we started to zero in on that and what can be done in terms of improving the overall district there. Again, talking about convention and repositioning Mass Mutual Center, the complex, to address some of the deficiencies. We know that parking is an issue. We know that additional meeting space is needed. And we know that, ideally a convention center, hotel, all of these connected in some form to the convention would be great. And I think give them a competitive advantage in the marketplace. And then finally, Willow Street, an area, kind of off Main, somewhat disconnected and currently underutilized, how that might come into play. I won't go through in great detail. We'll bring this back to you at the right time, but we've done some detailed study, and this is really more about the squint test for you all to just see, again, what MGM has done in terms of impact and the anchor of Mass Mutual Center and those vacancies, those underutilized parcels that are in white. Just the mere fact of turning those, repositioning those will become part of our focus and revitalizing the whole Main Street corridor. Again, talking about Court Square as the arrival space to downtown, and really the crossroads of many things from cultural to convention to now entertainment, and how these future parcels of 31 Elm Street, even some along Main Street and Old First Church, another piece that could be a great companion to 31 Elm, rethinking that district. The convention center, I mentioned solving for deficiencies. There's a number of different ways. We're studying that right now, particularly with the talk of and study that's going on with the Civic Center garage replacement and site, some areas around there, as well as some of the buildings along Main Street, the potential to reposition them for convention use or partnered with the convention is something that we're exploring. As well as the idea of South Gate, which I think would be wonderful on Main Street for the Civic Center, which would align with state and Maine. And finally, the future potential really that is driven by these first few steps of development would help revitalize, I think, the Willow Street area. I intentionally threw these together, not as a plan, but just to give you a sense of this is the comprehensive district. I think all of these pieces and parts are the basis and the foundation for what we're now advancing in terms of a master development plan. And we'll bring that back to you again later this year and at the beginning of next year to give you a stronger sense of the overall development strategy. I think it's important not to forget, we talk about bricks and mortar and parcels, it's important to talk about the district itself. And as I say, one cohesive district, we got to look at all the pieces and parts. I think the entries, the gateways, the civic space and amenities become key parts of that plan. And so we're looking as well as at the district definition, those key portals off on I-91 and Main and Dwight and others. And also some of the public improvements, be it streetscape, portals, and linkages. And again, on the right, you see a lot of this is likely to take the form of landscaping, of additional streetscape and district identifiers, and even picking up on what MGM has done in many respects in creating their own campus within this zone. I think we also want to talk a little bit about sequence. This is not a 2-year plan. As you can see, it's fairly ambitious, even in this concentrated zone that we're talking about. But it's important to also see what's happening today. We tend to focus only on things that aren't happening, but there are some things that are moving forward that I think are contributing to and starting to create, I think, a little bit of buzz and positive momentum in the right direction, including, as I mentioned, the study that's going on with the Civic Center garage. It'd be ideal to see that help solve for some of the deficiencies at the convention center with close-in, proximate, and connected parking, activating the ground floor. 31 Elm, we've talked about, but much needed market rate or much needed residential in downtown offering new product, and also activation of now Court Square with the potential retail and other things planned there. 101 State Street has been talked about. I'm sure you've read about that, potential reuse of that building at one of the key corners of State and Main. And then also some of the public assets, the Pinchon Park renovation, the connection to the museum campus, things that Related's doing in terms of Chestnut Tower, the new Skyview as it's called. And let's not forget the cornerstone at Union and Main with Wahlburgers and the eventual opening of that. So just in terms of what we kind of view, just again to help frame this in a 1 to 3 year, over the next couple of years, we think that the key parts are these timely opportunities with the parcels that Tim had called out, the foreclosure blocks, the 3 parcels, 113 State, the Colonial building, and as well as a smaller building in Stockbridge. And some of the others, other Main Street properties that are underutilized. I think we want to also carefully look at Old First Church, as I mentioned, as a companion piece in these first couple of years, and enhancements to the overall district around Court Square. And so we're starting to frame a sequence and almost a phasing, if you will, to help bracket this around realistic, viable development in the near term, as well as projecting a couple of years out. What's the next 5 years after that? A continuation of the Main Street redevelopment, looking at some of these other parcels that are, again, sitting and languishing a bit. Other convention center, the convention industry will rebound at some point. Now is a timely opportunity to look at some of those enhancements, be it the South Entry, additional hotel and expansion. So we started to suggest, again, another 5-year time frame for some of these additional components. And then that will beget even future phases. And I think, if we do this right, and we will, the first few steps will only enhance the value of those other properties around there, and hopefully be the spark that allows that market rate and allows other development to occur on its own. So just to fill this in terms of an overall land use, this is the complete picture, of retail and residential. This is one cohesive district, as we like to call it. That helped frame, as we talked about, both the parameters of the zoning, as well as sort of that near-term phase of acquisition and use of some of the development tools, incentives that the city can bring to bear to help acquire. And so I'll let Phil talk. The blue zone here is actually the basis. This again is the outline now of the overlay district, the Main Street and Convention overlay district. Which, again, as Councilor Fenton mentioned, this was the driving force. This effort is helping to frame that. I'll turn it over now to Phil.
Phil, before you go, Tim, could you go back to that last slide and just describe what the dotted orange line is?
Sure. The dotted orange, actually, that is the Court Square Urban Renewal District.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. And now let me turn it over to Phil.
Well, as you've heard from both Tim Sheehan and Tim Brangle, this really is a multi-layered economic development plan to try and kickstart economic projects around the casino. The Main Street and Convention overlay zoning is one of those layers that we're looking to implement. As the council's aware, overlay districts, as they're quite properly described, really overlay specific sections in communities. They overlay the existing zoning districts that lie underneath them. Overlay districts can be used to both lessen some of the requirements that you find in the underlying zoning district. That was done in the casino overlay district, which is directly across the street from here, where you had, a number of different uses that were not contemplated under the current zoning. So we kind of had to relax some of the requirements. And overlay districts can also be implemented to kind of enhance the underlying requirements. An example of that is the ex-overlay district in Forest Park, where we've implemented a number of enhanced design controls. The Main Street and Convention overlay zoning is really kind of a mix of that, where we're looking to kind of be able to expedite the projects that we find that are going to enhance the downtown through, helping with housing, hotel, office, retail, restaurant, and entertainment uses. So those would be expedited projects, whereas those uses that did not kind of fall under that encouraged use category would require additional levels of review. This just so, as with all zoning districts, this is a process that requires a review both through the planning board. That has been scheduled and it's planning to go before the planning board in early December. And then ultimately it would need to be voted on by the city council, and we're hoping to get that to you at your first meeting at the end of January. So there's a number of details. I wasn't going to go into those. We will provide you with the document which outlines what we're looking for. But again, I think this is just one of the tools in the economic development plan to kind of see if we can kickstart some of the development around the casino.
Great. So, Phil, would you mind just highlighting some of the things that the district creates as of right, and then also talking about the demolition piece?
Yeah, so currently, a number of uses that would be encouraged, again, uses that specifically enhance the downtown through office and retail, specific sizes would require administrative site plan review or planning board site plan review, which in some cases, depending on the use, housing is one of the issues. One of the uses that under our current zoning ordinance, once you're over a certain number of housing, and I think under our current zoning ordinance, it's 10, you trigger the special permit through the city council to do that, which again, is just a longer process to go through. Under the current, under what's proposed under the Main Street and Convention overlay zoning district, housing projects would require more of a planning board site plan review or an administrative site plan review. So we would encourage more certainty in the development process. And that's one of the keys to the overlay district, is to provide developers with more certainty. Unlike special permits, which can be denied, site plan reviews, although you can reasonably condition them, they can't be denied. So it's kind of the same thing that, again, we went through with the casino overlay district, where a number of the uses that they were proposing would have triggered special permits, but under the overlay district, those site plan review were switched to site plan reviews through the city council. One of the aspects we also are looking to implement as part of the overlay district is the control of the demolition of these buildings within the district, specifically those that have triggered historic designations. Both there's a number of buildings here that are over 100 years old, which would trigger the demo delay that the city council passed. There's also buildings that have preservation restrictions on them, and there's also buildings that fall within the National Register historic buildings. So anyone proposing to demolish those properties would require special permits through the city council. Again, there's a number of other layers to this, but those are kind of the keys.
And then before I open it up to any other questions, can you also just talk about the building permit fee incentive?
Yes, in order, one of the things that we're trying to do is not only permit these quickly, but also incentivize developers to kind of move quickly with these. Under the current codes, someone can come in and get permitted both through the building department and through the city council with a special permit, but then they have 2 years in order to do the project. And again, what we're hoping for is more of an expedited not only permitting process, but an expedited development process. So one of the things that we proposed, that if a developer gets approved and then files for their building permits within 6 months and moves forward with the projects, those building fees would be waived. So we believe that that would be an incentive to not only get the project approved, but also get the project moving forward. Because again, even, you know, someone could theoretically get a special permit to demolish one of the buildings. They could then get approved for whatever the reuse of that particular land is, but wouldn't necessarily have to move forward on that project for 2 years. So we're hoping that we not only, again, review the project expeditiously, but also get the developer kind of moving as quickly as we can as well, understanding there's certainly going to be economic impacts.
All right.
Mr. Chairman, could we just finish up with the section 108 and then open it up for questions on the whole package?
Sure.
Brian?
Sure. So section 108, just as a quick 108 refresher, it's a program that HUD offers to CDBG entitlement communities like Springfield, which gives us the ability to leverage our annual allocation of CDBG dollars into low-cost flexible financing for economic development projects. The city often acts as a middleman in section 108, so other 108s the council has approved in the past, more recently has been like the Restaurant Loan Fund, which we've given loans to Barkaya, Naismiths, and more recently White Lion Brewery, and the La Quinta Hotel when that was a defunct Holiday Inn. So traditionally those are operated where the city is basically taking a loan from HUD and then providing the loan to the end borrower. The loans are guaranteed by our annual CDBG allocation, so you know we take these very seriously. We're always diligent in our review of these because ultimately, should a loan default under the 108 program, it's your CDBG allocation that basically pays it off in the future. This application is a $5 million request to HUD to undertake acquisition activities within the overlay zone. We have structured this so that it can be in either a public acquisition or a public acquisition partnered with a private or nonprofit development corporation. The expected outlays for the properties from this fund would be in the range of 200 to 3 million per parcel, with the goal to extinguish the debt relatively quickly within 5 to 10 year time frame through future sales of the repositioned properties. You know, one thing to keep in mind, this is one element of financing we're looking at for this plan. So we are currently undergoing a study on other incentives that will be utilized by the future developers. So, I mean, we're looking at things like a DIF, TIF zone, HDIP. All of these things are going to be necessary for these projects because obviously there are gaps that exist. Otherwise, the private market would have addressed these earlier than this. In terms of where we are with the Section 108, in terms of the process of that, we are required to hold a public hearing, which we've done, a 30-day public comment period, which completed on November 15th, so we're complete with that. So our next step is City Council approval, which is why we're here. After City Council approval, should that occur, it goes to HUD Boston, and then HUD Boston recommends it to HUD DC. We've provided the draft to HUD Boston. The draft is on our website today, as it's been for the last month, for anybody to review and provide us with comment. So the next step is City Council review and approval, and then we move on to the federal level of approvals.
Mr. Chairman, that's it for us. I'm happy to say we're coming in at just about 25 minutes. Everybody was very clear that they had less than a half hour. And if anybody's ever worked with Tim Brangle before, I never had any concern about Brian or Phil, but I did.
Oh, well, good job. Good job sticking to the time, Tim. So, all right, so I have some of my colleagues on the phone. Councilor Ramos has raised his hand. Councilor Ramos, and then Councilor Gomez.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. So yes, we have been talking about this idea for a while now. I think it's a great idea. We have to do something in order to attract new businesses to this part of downtown. It doesn't, you know, it doesn't look good to have all of these empty storefronts. So I'm glad that we're finally doing something about it. Mr. Chairman, my only question is, what can we do around these HUD 108 loans to ensure that during the construction phase of these jobs, that they are hiring Springfield residents? I always ask this question anytime we have an opportunity to talk about new development, that they're hiring Springfield residents and that they're hiring people who are in need of these jobs, so that we're not hiring people from out of state, and that these resources stay in the community. My second part of that question is there anything that we can do to incorporate some language, some similar language that we have in the TIF ordinance, to make sure that the funds are actually going to companies that are playing by the rules, and that these loans do not go to contractors that cheat?
I can take that, Mr. Chairman.
Please.
First of all, Councilor Ramos, the intent of this, the utilization of the Section 108 funding is to actually deal with acquisition of distressed properties by the public entity. And then ultimately, the intent is to repackage them and put them out for an RFP for redevelopment purposes. In that RFP, we would be putting forward those types of requirements in the RFP. I think that answers your question. And in terms of ensuring the issues on employment, I think that can actually be made part of the contract associated with the land transfer.
Yes, I would love to see that. That's one of the things that we talked to the SRA about doing. And that's certainly something that we have pushed for in the past. That's the reason why we have a TIF ordinance and an ASTIP ordinance. And it sort of defeats the purpose when we have other public funding opportunities that don't have the same language. So yes, if there's a way that we can put that into the agreement, I would love to see that.
Yeah, and I'll add, just building on, I think it does, it starts, make sure it's properly conveyed in the offering, the solicitation, when we go out to the development community, that it's very clear, and then memorialize in a redevelopment agreement. Once the developer is selected, there's negotiation, all of that gets memorialized into an agreement that will bind them to those commitments. So that's the right way to do it.
And I think, the good thing about that will be that before the developer is even selected, you'll see what each of the developers is putting forward with regards to their plan to meet the city's requirements.
Great. No, I certainly appreciate that. MGM did a very good job of meeting their responsibilities under the ACA and meeting the numbers that they promised us in terms of hiring people and hiring locally, women and minorities. And so we got to keep that going. So thank you. Appreciate that.
Councilor Gomez?
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question is for, I think, Tim or Brian. How long or I guess the gentleman from Chicago that's on the call as well. How long have you guys been working on this district? And I guess Phil can answer that question too. How long have you guys been kind of working towards this blue district?
Well, I can take that to answer the question with the district that we're proposing. We started in the fall of 2019. And as I indicated, our efforts accelerated as the major properties across the street from the casino went up for auction and then ultimately went into foreclosure.
Yeah, I know. I have my business inside of one of them, and I'm like one of the only tenants in there. I just, the reason why I asked that question is, one, aside from being the chair of EchoDev, and trying to build relationships with you guys, I'm kind of upset. Outside of that, this is a great thing that's happening. I'm just upset that it took a full year me being the ward counselor, right, dealing with struggling businesses down there to stay open, trying to figure out, you know, a relationship wise to try to figure out what's going on specifically in this district, that I wasn't even aware, not one time, of even plans or involved with a conversation on impacts, or, you know, even given a little bit of an input on, you know, struggling businesses. A lot of these businesses that are in this blue zone are businesses that people of color have invested into. And I feel like, just like the Elm Street program and the project, people of color's voices are not even being heard. You know, in retrospect, you know, I had a family member, a cousin, that lost his restaurant that's right across from MGM because of, obviously, things that were going on specific to the district. I have, you know, struggling business owners like Sun Kim Bop that had to close down. You know, I just want to make sure that in this redevelopment, and if this proposal goes through and this works itself out, that the people that have invested into that neighborhood or into that community right there in this vicinity get to stay there. You know, I have great concern when it comes to, you know, conversations, and me being a stakeholder specifically in the downtown district, that I find out through only a subcommittee meeting and not just preempted, you know, because early on when we did the 108, before you were here, Mr. Sheehan, we did it for the Worthington corridor, and for those businesses, and, you know, seeing what ultimately happened. But then we've seen, after some folks got the 108, how part of that Worthington district has closed down and is up for sale. It really brings me to a point of trying to understand, you know, it's not a secret that the downtown is empty. You know, we've had plenty of businesses that are ahead of the curve, and, you know, we've invested tons of money. And I know that we want to be able to make Ward 1 or the downtown district, because obviously there's a null and void of wanting to call it Ward 1, that we want to work there, play there, and make sure it works for everyone, and make sure that it looks great for MGM. But, you know, realistically, the facts are that, you know, not only, and the thing is, I can't say that it's only Springfield, but I've been to different districts that downtowns are dying, right? Brick and mortar has been really a problem when it comes to some businesses. And obviously the pandemic hasn't been actually nice to any of us, specifically and around. But I think, you know, I have tremendous amounts of questions. I would love for this proposal to be sent to me so I can, you know, look into it a little bit more deeper. I'm definitely in support of it, but I'm just disheartened that, again, and historically, and I'm going to say historically because I'm not going to be here more than another year on this council, but I've always had a problem with learning things on the back end, and me being the chairman of economic development for the past, I'm going to be honest, 4 years. I don't understand, why is it so hard for me to get just a little bit of information of anything that's happening, but more in the fact that this is actually my ward. Like I'm hurt, you know. I'm not going to go into much more, because sometimes my emotions, I have to keep them in check, but I'm hurt and I'm bothered. But at the most part, you know, this is something that's necessary. But I'm going to be honest, when it comes to, you know, relationship building and working out things for the future, something needs to change, because there's going to be a lot of businesses and people are going to hear about this stuff that specifically put their heart and souls kind of into these things. And obviously we don't have oversight over these buildings that went into foreclosure. But outside of that, I think that, you know, these incentives, and I'm happy to hear that we're going to be going into hopefully, you know, getting different businesses and things down there. But these are a lot of things that, you know, we were like a lot of these businesses are waiting for, you know. And with that being said, I just needed to state my my position on it. But for the most part, you know, I'm extremely bothered that, you know, I had to wait over a year to know what was going on in my district, and actually, you know, learning of this now.
Thank you, Councilor Gomez. I will take a great deal of responsibility for that. I should have brought you into the conversation. And honestly, I was just a little carried away with a lot of other things that we're dealing with in this district. And the blue zone, as it's been referred to for as long as I can remember, we've been involved in the casino project, back with Mr. Kennedy even. It's always been something that we've wanted to pursue, and it wasn't until a couple of weeks ago, maybe a week and a half ago, that in my discussions, I became aware that this was going to be appearing before the city council sometime soon. And so when I heard that, I asked that we preemptively put it on the agenda for my first casino meeting since COVID. So, you know, I apologize for not, at the very least, having the conversation with you up front. And certainly it's your district. It certainly involves economic development. I wasn't thinking of it in that vein. So I apologize for that. The good news to it is that
in respect, Councilor Fenton, Chairman, it's not that necessarily you only should be taking responsibility, and you're very humble and noble for doing that, but there should be a little bit of a dedication from the administration, specifically when it comes to anything that's going on in Ward 8, let it be in Ward 2, let it be in Ward 6. It's not even about that. It's the fact of the matter is, when something happens in any of these districts, ward councilors and also at large and people that are in leadership should have just a consensus of hey, by the way, and it doesn't hurt, we're working on this. If you want to know more about it, reach out, and if I'm unaware, and like you said before, Tim's predecessor, you guys been working on the blue zone for how long? The first vote that I ever took on this council was on the Bible of MGM.
That's right.
And I was elected in 2015. So then now I'm even more pissed, to learn that in 4 years, there's been this conversation. Obviously we hear about them, but not to be included, regardless of whatever relationships are out there, whatever they might think. It just feels, honestly, with the temperature that's going on, that yes, there's social issues that happen, but what people of color want is economic justice. And this right here is economic justice. And if you don't have Black and brown people at the forefront, when we were the ones investing in this districts, when there was nothing happening before MGM, losing our businesses, and I'm talking about personally, and really just trying to make it work, it's disheartening. And that's all it is. It's just disheartening that, the same thing happened with, and I would say it time and time again when we had casino oversight meetings on the Elm Street project, please don't forget the ward counselor. And I've said that plenty of times. And what happened? They forgot about the ward counselor, but the people didn't forget about the ward counselor. And all I'm saying is this: we want to work, right? We are elected to be able to get engaged, be involved, and be the educators to the people that, like Aqua, right? Those are stakeholders, right? We're talking about a district that mainly is commercial, but outside of it, we're going to be creating more residential and more housing that we need to stabilize and make sure that at least there's something part of it. But for the most part, it is what it is. But I'm just not gonna submit and just say, hey, I'm gonna continue begging for information. Like, I shouldn't have to beg.
No,
and I'm gonna leave it at that. And I'll reach out to them on my own. But I wanted to be on the record to state that once again, the ward counselor was forgotten.
Well, I will just conclude by saying this, Counselor, that that certainly was not my intent. It may have been the outcome, but was not the intent. And none of these programs have been approved or appeared before the planning board or the city council. So it's not too late to do that. And nothing is approved or set in stone. And I may be guilty of preemptively putting it on agenda before it appeared before the council, and I can see how that would make you feel that way. So again, I apologize for that. And there will be time, more than sufficient time, to have those discussions and make sure that all of the things that are important to Ward 1 and your constituency and you are heard and addressed. So I don't know if anybody else wants to speak to it. You certainly don't have to, but that's my response.
Mr. Chairman, from the division's perspective, I mean, we welcome whatever input anybody has into and again, this is a draft plan at this point. There's a period in time that we have to go before this whole plan is finalized. Something needed to be brought forward in terms of the goals and objectives of the plan. And Counselor, I think, I'll go back and double check. I believe at the outset of this planning process, we talked about this in an economic development subcommittee meeting. But I will double check on that. You know, if there was something that, you know, we failed to do with regards to doing regular updates with the subcommittee, I apologize for that. But it was never meant as a slight or intended to keep, you know, anybody's voice out of the process.
Thanks, Tim. Tim Allen, Councilor Allen, your hand is raised.
Yeah, thanks, Councilor Fenton. Listening to Councilor Gomez's concerns and thoughts and hearing this, what I thought was a really good presentation. There was talk about this coming before. I have two questions. This is the first one is kind of a statement and a question. Is why don't we can we rectify this now before it comes before the council? Could we have an information session for people who are affected by this? We're not in this meeting. People who have businesses there or residences there. Could we have a public hearing? I don't know if it's, you know, public hearing is the right term, but certainly an informational session in the same way that we had community information sessions for you know, marijuana applicants, et cetera. They had to have a community information session. It seems correctable, what Councilor Gomez brought up. If this isn't coming before the council till, I think, at first meeting in January or late January, that's 6-8 weeks away. So I just suggest that maybe something could be put together, because people who are there should have a chance to see what's being discussed. And maybe Councilor Gomez could set up an economic development meeting that would, you know, pick this up. I'm not sure what the right entity is, but what he's brought up is correctable. So let's see if we can correct it. My second point is, how long, I don't want to do the how long on the whole thing, because we know the whole thing will change 1,000 times, but what's the shortest time frame if everything went well that one of these vacant properties or, you know, business could use a Section 108 fund or whatever to get started and open? Are we looking at a year? Are we looking at 2 years? I mean, I'm just asking for the shortest possible time frame, the amount of runway to start to see some concrete development here. Can anybody take? I know it's not a fun answer to say something because people fear it'll get locked in stone, but it's, you know, just gives us a little more concrete information on what we're looking at.
Realistically, Councilor, going through the acquisition process, ultimately stabilizing the property and putting it back out to the market and getting somebody back in is a 2-year window.
2-year window. Okay. So 2 years from now, all things being equal, things going relatively well, we might have something open 2 years from now.
2 years from acquisition.
2 years from acquisition. Okay. Thank you, Tim. That's it, Councilor Fenton. Those are my 2 points.
Coming back to your first point, though, Councilor Allen, from staff's perspective, it's kind of like, you know, the cart before the horse. Our concern is that we don't necessarily want to be out in the public talking about a plan that the council folks, or at least at the subcommittee level, haven't had at least a briefing on. So that was kind of our purpose in trying to advance this as well.
Yeah, I think there's nothing wrong with that, Tim. I totally understand that. It's just that in the new, you know, giving respect to Councilor Gomez's thoughts, I don't know the right way to get the info to the people he is feels
Fully
have not-
welcome any public meeting to have a discussion about the goals and objectives of the plan and how we develop the plan and, you know, the component pieces of it.
You said you could have a public meeting with that? Or
Fully welcome it.
Fully welcome it. So that's all I'm saying. So let's figure out what we can do without locking ourselves in. And there's a lot of great minds in this meeting. I'm sure we can figure this out and get everybody at first base at the same time. Thank you.
Thank you. Council President Hurst, your hand is raised.
Thank you. I would just add, and I agree with a lot of what has been said, but I think there are two different things here. I think it's one thing to be told what the plan is and informed about the plan. And then there's another thing to be part of the creation of the plan. And so I think we probably need to work to do both. And I know that may be difficult, but I think when we're taking on something of this magnitude, it is important. And I think to Councilor Gomez's point, if we involve folks early on in the process, then we as a city council might be able to help facilitate that process and come up with suggestions like Councilor Allen just made. But we could have done that at the outset of the plan, of the creation of the plan, just so we could take input. Because the last thing residents want to do is be told what is going to happen. It's my 2 cents.
Okay. Any other counselors on the plan or the 108 or the overlay? I think Councilor Allen and his suggestion's a good one. So I'll work with Councilor Gomez, and if he wants to lead a meeting on it, I'll support that. And we can figure out how to facilitate that conversation that should involve not just being informed, but providing input. Councilor Gomez.
I just want to say that I respectfully, agree with the proposals. Obviously, if the commissioner has a concern with those, I know obviously we can talk about that stuff offline. In no way do I want it to be a reflect of the fact that, you guys are doing or trying to do an amazing job to bring this district back. If I, for one, understand this part of my district very well because I spent a long time in this district outside of me being a council member, because of me having an office there, understanding, what was there and what's not there anymore. That was kind of, certain buildings are the lifeblood of that little blue zone, right? And we understand that there's a lot of fantastic economic development stuff that are going on. It just, I was just, not only, I am really overzealous to the fact that this is awesome, right? This is great. But at the same time, it's like a pit in my stomach. So then when I go talk to my constituency that are businesses, once this comes out in the outlay and say, hey, listen, I thought you were going to advise us or talk to us about whenever certain things are happening here. And then when they talk about, what does this mean for my business? Does this mean that evidently down in the next 5 years, do I lose it or am I involved? And, those are just certain questions that put me in uncomfortable positions. Obviously, the plan is something that is necessary. But my whole thing is, and I've said it time and time again, it's just, it doesn't hurt to just, get a little bit of input and say, hey, and let it not be me. Let's say I was the Ward 2 counselor, right? And I wasn't in Ward 1. I'd still be saying, hey, listen, whatever's going on in IO or on Hungry Hill, just make a little effort to say, we having this conversation. And outside of it, it's just, I think, a sense of, I would just leave it at this. It's just a little bit of respect. That's all. I respect all of you guys for all the work that you do. And I don't think you guys, I don't have to keep tabs or think you have to email me all the time. But I think in respect of a magnitude of a project like this, we know that when it comes to, great things of this magnitude, everybody, specifically ward councilors or contributing stakeholders would like to just have some input, and that's all. I think nobody's not going to want to support something like this, but a little bit of input makes room for a lot of people to feel and take a sense of ownership for a reason to want to support this, and that comes from the grassroots area when it comes to business owners and also, future people that want to move down there or people that are already residents of this district. So thank you so much for that time, and I yield.
Thank you, Councilor Gomez. It's just after 5. If we could just spend the last 5, maybe no more than 10 minutes on, actually we should be able to do it in 5 minutes. The last 2 items on the agenda, which are just an update from MGM on COVID-19 protocols, very high level if you could, Jose. And then I'm gonna have a brief discussion just updating everybody on the HCA payments.
Thank you, Councilor Fenton. So as many of you guys know, the company put out a 7-point plan back during, earlier in the year that really was meant to combat the pandemic and make sure that we had the highest safety protocols in place for both our team members and guests. So just to quickly go over, those include everything from screenings of our employees as they walk into the property, temperature checks, things like that. We don't do temperature checks on our guests, but we do have kind of a quick screening protocol when they come in. Masks are mandatory for both, obviously, team members and our guests. Physical distancing, social distancing has been a big piece of our property. So if you go on the gaming floor, you'll notice that you're not going to be playing right next to somebody. You're either going to have a minimum of 6 feet in between a slot machine, or you're going to have some type of barrier like a plexiglass that's put in place to obviously protect both the guests and the team members that are working on the property. Other things that we've implemented, hand washing stations on the property on either side of the center that folks can walk up, obviously wash their hands, and then multiple hand sanitizing stations across the property. Signage has been really key, but a lot of signage to remind folks, obviously, of wearing a mask and social distancing. Even lane markers to kind of help separate folks when they're coming in and out of the property. In terms of, we also have some digital innovation, particularly in our restaurants, so that, there's digital menus, so folks can walk up to one of our restaurants, they'll use their phone, the QR code apps, and, scan the QR code, and you'll have the menu for whatever restaurant you were attending. And so that's made that, less touching of old school style menus. Also, we've had digital enhancements on kind of check-ins. And so folks can kind of have a virtual queue-in into the restaurants and kind of get a text message when their seat is available. So a lot of those enhancements have happened on property, particular. And I think, it's done a great job. And the other thing I would highlight is the property is a fairly new property. So one of the things that we have an advantage of is the fact that we have, brand new HVAC system, heating and ventilation that obviously is able to circulate the air in and out and kind of really put out fresh air, into the property and clean air. Our EVS team has been our stars of the property. They're constantly on the gaming floor, really focusing on high touch areas, doorknobs, railings, slot machines. They have been our kind of unsung heroes through all of this and making sure that they touch all of the high points throughout the property so that folks, that minimizes anything there. And then some of the things that I did want to mention as well is obviously, with the restricted schedule that we have, we've from 10 a.m. to 9:30 p.m. daily. That's our new hours of operation as of November 6th. And the amenities that we do have open currently, obviously the gaming floor from 10 to 9:30. South End Market is open from 11 to 9:30, and then the Chandler Steakhouse, which we had recently brought back on in a limited capacity on Fridays and Saturdays from 5 to 9:30. Excuse me. We've since shut down Tap Sports Bar temporarily until further notice, and some of the other amenities. So that's a kind of quick high level on some of the kind of COVID-19 protocols, and obviously our current state in terms of operations. Happy to
Jose,
answer.
what are your current hours?
Excuse me, Councilor Fenton, I just need to jump in for 1 minute. We have a license commission meeting coming up in a little bit.
Okay.
So would it be possible to wrap up in 10 minutes?
It'll be less than 5.
Wonderful. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Brennan. Oh, what about the hours, Jose?
The hours 10 to 9:30 p.m. 10 a.m. to 9:30 daily is what the casino is open, and South End is 11 to 9:30, and Chandler is 5 to 9:30.
Okay. Any questions from anybody about the COVID-19 protocols, MGM? All right. Thank you, Jose. And just the last point is there was some news coverage previously about HCA payments being made, not being made. MGM has worked with the city, and all amounts invoiced by the city consistent with the HCA have been paid by MGM to date, and we expect that to continue. So that's really not much to discuss there. Anything anybody wants to add? All right. Thank you, everybody.
Good meeting. Good to be back talking about this stuff.
Yep. Thank you, Brendan, for sticking with us, and everybody else for participating. Tim Sheehan, can you email the overlay district and the plan to, specifically to Councilor Gomez and the other, well, just send it to the whole council.
I'll send it to the whole council.
Yep, and then Councilor Gomez,
Thank you so much.
You and I can hook up, and if there's any input or questions, concerns, we'll get it addressed and work with the appropriate parties. All right. Thank you, everybody. Have a good night.
Bye now.
Thank you. Bye.
Yeah.